Well, here we are back here. New guest this week, Jason Hussey. Texted me today. He said, "Reed, I got to go home from work sick." Jason, raging headache. I'm going to guess that's probably due to his Hamilton Tiger Cats slow start to the season. We can get into that. We have Evan Willsmore back here today. Evan, how the heck are you?
I'm good, man. Filling in for Jason. Obviously, I don't have my Ticats jersey on or anything like that, but I'll do the best I can to, fill his shoes for one show and, talk about, some of the games that were played this weekend. I watched a couple of them. I thought it was a good slate, and we'll dive into it.
Yeah, so Evan, if anyone's new here to the well, I got to change my. If anyone's new here to the podcast, let me see if I can fix this here. Giveaway is currently paused. We'll figure that stuff out. If anyone's new here, Evan did all the shows with us last year with Jason and I, doing all that up through the Grey Cup. Evan working now. Evan's the assistant DPP over at the Vegas Nighthawks. Busy guy here through the summer, and they're a good season, right, with everything with the IFL. So Evan, but we get him today. We get his expertise here. A lot of player scouting and development. Evan has a keen eye for us, and obviously not that Jason doesn't have a great football mind as well, but it'll be good just to get a different voice and opinion as well on here today. I appreciate that. Like I said, like and subscribe, get in here. We'll figure out a new giveaway. Might have a hold on the season ticket giveaway. Evan and I were talking about that off screen. We'll get to that, but really kind of exciting CFL season thus far. Like, I think the games, I watched a couple of the games live. I tracked a couple of the other ones. Dorothy was out of town on Saturday. I watched the Toronto Edmonton game in full. Yeah, Tim living the life right now. Must be nice. I don't know if there's anyone happier in the world right now than Tim Capper and Cliffy D. Pine with the Alouettes Fight Deck podcast. But Evan, 3 weeks in, like, I think this has been a very competitive, very compelling CFL season.
Yeah, the games have been great. They've got off to a really hot start with a lot of close games. There's been very few games that have been, blowouts or ones that you would maybe turn the TV off early for. It's been really good, and that's, I think, what the CFL has needed. I don't remember how things exactly started last year, but I don't think it was this good because I definitely would have remembered it if it was. And it's just good for the league, because last year we were talking about there were still, the CFL hiatus is 4 years behind us now for COVID, but we felt like even last year, which was, 2023, they started playing again in 2021, but we still felt like there was a bit of a ramp up, I think, from COVID and, getting everybody organized again. Not to say that there wasn't, good football or anything, but you did feel it at times, I think. Now I feel like in 2024, we're officially past that now that we've had 3 full seasons in the CFL post-COVID, under our belt. Things are a lot more maybe complete, and that's why I think we're getting a lot of these, really close and really entertaining games.
Yes, and we talked about this last year. I think the hiatus year really horrendous. I think for the CFL in terms of getting fans back into the stands. I think we've seen that. We saw Saskatchewan here, and Evan, we won't talk a lot of attendance here today. I promise we get enough of that with the UFL stuff. But, I saw Jamie and I tweeting about that. It's tough getting people into Saskatchewan. They're off to a good start, right? 3-0 here and seeing kind of lackluster crowds there. But I think you saw that with the fans. I think you saw that with the kind of the media coverage, and then just the play. And I think we're like fully back up to speed. I thought we saw that going into last season. That first year coming out of the hiatus was really rough. But I agree. Like, I think it's all systems go. And then also, like, a lot of the storylines that we were tracking going into the season, I think we've been able to really see here. We're Bo last year and had kind of the injuries and stuff. And even though Hamilton has started slow, this week Bo didn't look great, but he looked pretty decent 2 weeks ago. McLeod is making moves with Edmonton, even though they, continuing their losing ways. But, like, what a game did they have against Toronto? And then who the heck thought, Winnipeg would start 0-3? Every time I tweet out, like, this is the world. This is like, I am the happiest person in the world with Winnipeg starting 0-3. Is that the biggest storyline for you, or what do you think is kind of the biggest thing so far going into this young season that you've been paying attention to?
Yeah, I definitely think it is. And it's a surprise. I don't read too much on social media nowadays, but, sometimes I scroll through things. And I noticed a couple people were saying, like, well, it really shouldn't be a surprise if you look at how much, veteran leadership Winnipeg lost, and maybe they weren't able to make up for all that. But I still feel like this team is, on paper at least, much better than 0-3. I think, any person who's watched the CFL the past couple seasons, if you had told them that Winnipeg would start 0-3 this year, they'd probably be like, you're crazy. There's no way. That team just has, too much experience. And yes, they did lose some talent, and there are a lot of new faces at key positions, but there's just, again, too much experience still, I think, to have that start. But sure enough, they're sitting at 0-3, and it's a big change, right? I mean, a team that has dominated the CFL, even going back before COVID, right? Their first Grey Cup before this run that they've had, 4 straight. That started in 2019, and we just haven't really seen anything like that. I don't know when the last time Winnipeg went 0-3 was, but I know it's been a long time, probably over 10 years, I'd imagine. So that definitely is the biggest surprise for me, no doubt. And we'll get into more details about their team when we talk about the game.
Yeah, and I mean, just I've seen comments, Zach kind of is proving maybe what people thought all along, where he's, maybe an above average quarterback, but with kind of elite talent around him versus, like, is he the one carrying? I think we've seen a lot of that. I think Cody Fajardo has looked totally on the other side, like he's on top of the world. I mean, the man is, the prom king, the homecoming king. I mean, just kind of really on top of the world there, running in Montreal. Really excited. And man, we were talking about that in the group chat, like, he got his Grey Cup, and I think, like, weight's off his back and he's able to rock and roll. And I think Cody's really kind of playing kind of that free world right now. And I think he's kind of got house money. I think that's been really exciting here. So you just kind of looking at the standing here. Like I said, Saskatchewan off to, good start here, taking care of Hamilton here. On Sunday, right? All my dates are confused with that. BC here 2-1. Calgary looking dominant. I thought, kind of that week against BC at home. They're, hanging in there. Edmonton, Winnipeg, and I think Edmonton certainly looked like they could have won against Toronto. I thought that was a really competitive back and forth. For my money, that was the best game I had seen start to finish all year. And I do my best, and I do a lot of catch up on Mondays, like I did today, and I'm working on my best Dustin Nielsen impression, watching some of these games on the treadmill. Montreal looks like world beaters with that, and Toronto taking care of business. I don't know, any general thoughts on the standings, and we'll kind of get into the games. We can go reverse chronological.
Yeah, well, I think another storyline, just building off what we were talking about with Winnipeg, I know Winnipeg lost the Grey Cup to Montreal, and we were there obviously in Hamilton to see that. But I think the one interesting thing from that is, because that was so unexpected for a lot of people, I think, in a lot of people's heads, Montreal wasn't going to start this strong, and that maybe them and Winnipeg would still be more balanced, just because in a lot of people's heads, Winnipeg was just such a dominant team for so long. But like Montreal, they're the best team in the league right now, in my opinion. And I don't really see, I don't see how, you could really think otherwise if you've been watching the games. I mean, I know Saskatchewan is 3-0, but again, they've been more surprising, and we'll get into them too. I think they got a lot of great things going on. But Montreal just looks so complete, and I really do think that if we're talking about Cody Fajardo specifically, I do think that last drive to beat Winnipeg in the Grey Cup, where he had the touchdown to Tyson Philpott, and obviously the third down conversion and all that we saw live, it was very exciting. I really do think that has changed. Maybe the way that he thinks, or I don't want to say the course of his entire career, because we're only a couple games into this season, but he's playing really well, and he's playing a lot better than he played last year. He looks a lot more complete, a lot more poised. And again, he didn't play poorly last year, but maybe Jason mentioned this on the show last week, because I was listening. Cody last year, he didn't look bad, but he didn't look perfect either. He was kind of in the middle. The whole team was kind of in the middle, right? Of, we didn't know who they could really beat. Like, they were good against all the, lower teams below 500. And they, sometimes struggled against the teams that were above 500. But now it looks more like he can beat anybody, and I think that bodes really well, for that team. And it's just good to see, right? It's good to see, I think, them continue to prove a lot of people wrong. I know the Montreal fans, they're probably like, well, we knew and all that. And, I get it, right? But I think there's a lot of people out there who still expected things to go differently. But we have to give credit to Montreal. Great job that they've done. And as for the rest of the standings, I would say they're, maybe expected. Again, Saskatchewan being first in the West, maybe not. And, I'll wait to get into them when we talk about the game, like I said. But, everything else looks about right. We're only 3 games in. Some teams have only played 2. So, Still got some time before things really get figured out.
The Montreal thing, I agree with you that, yeah, because last year, they were the big, like, no one took us seriously. Like, we were the under the radar team, and they came in and they kept adding all year, and then they won. And I agree. You would totally think, okay, then they're not going to come in this year being under the radar like that. With the Kraken kind of lived through that here this last year, where we got in the playoffs the second year, kind of overperformed where we were supposed to be. And then last year we said, oh, okay, now teams are going to take us seriously. And then we did much poorer coming into year 3 because, teams are kind of prepping for us extra than you would. And I heard that with a lot of feedback from a lot of the media stuff I listened to, because obviously I don't, cover hockey or know that as well either. But yeah, you would think like people would come in, be ready for Montreal. Like they're kicking ass. I think I do agree, or I guess I would add to your point that I do think winning the Grey Cup kind of changed Cody's life in that way. That I think athletes are human in that way. And I think that there's, obviously athletic intangibles that you can't whatever, but a lot of it is mentality. And I think Cody got to a point now, and I think he came out of Saskatchewan kind of like a wounded animal, and I'm not wanted, and we've got to rebuild. And I think he bet on himself. He delivered last year, and I think he's riding off that. I remember, quitting my job and figuring out what I was going to do. And when Dorothy and I wanted to buy our new house and things, I'm like, sometimes you can just, with the right mentality, just kind of will through and use that. And besides even just the physical attributes that you have. So I think Cody's great. I think that team is playing with so much confidence. I remember Jason and I were talking, and we'll get to that game here, Ottawa and kind of their elite defense and Bob Dice and all of that. I think it was like 28-1 or something. I messaged Hussey. I said, well, how about that elite Ottawa defense here coming in, putting up all these points? But this was, talk about raising the banner, homecoming, Montreal, putting up the Grey Cup banner. I rewatched this game today. I was driving to Spokane for work on Thursday, but this was a shellacking all the way around. Drew Brown looks, human now. Never had a turnover, all that. Cody looked great here, 3 touchdowns, threw for 1 billion yards. Takeaways from this one, because if you want to put up the Grey Cup banner and have a good showing, this really gave everyone at home a good, everyone there kind of a good experience.
Yeah, well, I know there's been a lot of good games this year, but in terms of individual team performance, I think, this might be the best that we've seen all year, and I'm talking about Montreal. We already spoke on Cody Fajardo a bit, but what a phenomenal game he had. I think at halftime, I think he only had like 2 incompletions and already had 200 and something yards. And it just, again, phenomenal. You can't say enough good things about that. He even added, I think, 40 yards on the ground, rushing, so very efficient in both departments. The other thing that we didn't talk about with Montreal, yes, their offense has been playing well. You've got Cody Fajardo, you've got Tyson Philpott, Reggie White was back in this one, played very well. But Montreal's defense, man, that's the other thing. I talk about complete performances, and I feel like I don't give defense enough credit whenever I'm on these shows or talking about football or whatever, because I don't know. I've always been more of an offensive-minded guy. The only football experience that I have playing was on the offensive line in middle school for flag football. But all that aside, when I say complete performance, I got to give a shout out to the defense too. What a game, just all around that they played. And Tyrese Beverett. Hell of a performance by him. Just look at, every single one of those stat categories is filled out. That means you had a pretty successful day and you were literally all over the place. Again, just speaks for itself. So Montreal, undefeated, that's your best win of the year, probably. They're going to keep rolling. As for Ottawa, I felt like, they came back down to earth a bit. If I'm a Redblacks fan, I wouldn't be scared. It was probably a bit of a shock. You go from beating Winnipeg, who, again, I know Winnipeg obviously is struggling now. It's not what we expected, but, Ottawa, they came back down to earth a bit, but I think that's okay. Again, I think, there was still a lot of question marks around that team. Drew Brown, this is his first, true starting job in the CFL. I understand, he played with Winnipeg last year, looked very good in those games. I like him a lot, but it's a bit different when you're thrusted into the full-time starting role. And it's a role that I, imagine he'll keep, even if this game he was a bit slower. But, Ottawa, it's just one of those days, you don't have the start you want. You're going up against the reigning Grey Cup champs. It's a very important night for them. You got to keep in mind, yes, their win against Winnipeg was good, and there was the weather delay and all that, and that was a good confidence boost. But to me, this is still a very young team, and they have a lot of new additions. They had to make a lot of changes. Obviously, last year didn't go as planned for them. But I think, they'll get back on track, and I still see a lot of positive things about this team. I still really like Drew Brown a lot, believe in him. Again, I think that he's going to keep that job. And I think that was probably it.
It's tough. And we talked, Jason and I, last week with Drew Brown, and because obviously Mazzoli's kind of here waiting in the wings whenever he's back up, coming back from injury. And is he doing enough? Just Drew going to, earn that? And Jason and I said, it's the thing. We saw this last season with Dustin Crum. You can get, 5, 6, 7 starts. You can do decently, and teams don't have enough film on you. Be able to kind of take care of that. But yeah, I don't know if the book's out on Drew Brown now or Montreal's just that good. But I mean, they were crazy. Even the highlights I was rewatching today on YouTube, just huge hits by Montreal defense, just big guys taking care of business. It really felt like they came in and just exerted their will over all of this. Cody's running for touchdowns. He's doing little flip passes. We were saying in the group chat, he's just seeing the field totally different. And just that, I don't know, just a weird boost of confidence there. And then him and Moss and everything else. I mean, like I said, not only do they look like the best team in the East by far, but definitely the best team in the CFL currently. And I don't think it's even close.
Yeah, no doubt. And just going back to Drew Brown real quick, I think in a sense it's almost good that he had a game like this. And I know he probably doesn't feel that way, but, at some point you have to have a kind of coming down to earth moment. And, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's get better. I can learn from this. I honestly think that's good for a lot of players. And I can tell you as someone who, works with a lot of pro athletes, it doesn't – in the moment, you're kind of, kicking yourself and, I had a bad game. I hurt the team. As the quarterback, you're supposed to be the leader. But, there are some benefits, I think, from that. You can really just go back and say, well, how do I make sure that this doesn't happen again? And, maybe Drew Brown comes out of this one and he plays. I keep saying, I don't feel like this should be a loss of confidence for Ottawa fans or, anybody there. I mean, I think it was just one of those days, right? At some point, Drew Brown has been so good, even if it's in a limited role, he's going to – I think people have to remember that, now that he's the full-time starter, it's still a bit of a different experience, even if, again, he's been good in the past and he has all the tools and he was brought there for a reason. I think it's just, to me, it's just one of those things that's a part of the game and a part of life, honestly.
Yeah, and also, I mean, there's a reason why he was a backup in Winnipeg. I mean, you always got to look at okay, and then he's getting the start. But you get that a lot of times with the CFL where even last year, and we love Dane Evans and he's off now, coaching or whatever, retired. But Dane, we kind of knew Dane, and then he comes to BC and then Vernon got hurt. And it's oh, Dane's going to come in. I mean, Dane wasn't great right before he went over. Yeah, I mean, he can be the best backup in the league, but it's still kind of different for that. Looking here, I thought Drew Brown had a couple really good, long completions, kind of showing off that arm. But, Dom Rhymes here, and I'm oh, yeah, he's with Ottawa now because I'm watching. I'm still trying to keep up, and we're coming off the UFL season. Ottawa had the week 1 bye, and I'm oh, that's where he, because BC, and we've talked about them, and we'll talk about them here on the show as well, and kind of figuring out their new receiver core. I'm okay, Dom Rhymes is there. He's fine. Second receiver at 6 targets, 3 on that. I just, if you're going to have someone like him in the mix, let's get him more. I don't know. I just feel like maybe we're underutilizing him as well here on the offense.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, too, Ottawa's just got a lot of receiver depth. And, Jalen Acklin, I think people, were quick to write him off, but he was good when he was in Hamilton. I remember him. Nick Mardner, promising rookie out of Auburn. Braylon Addison has been around. He was in Hamilton, too. He's been around the CFL for a while. They're actually bringing him in on some run plays now, so they're kind of switching things up with him. Maybe that's an opportunity for Dom Rhymes to get more reps. But, again, like I said, a lot of new pieces on this team. It's going to take a couple games to figure out how everybody gels together and, what certain players like. And, again, just part of the process. So that's why, I was saying it specifically with Drew Brown, but for the team as a whole, for – fans and whatever, some things take time. There's a lot of promising things. I already think that this Ottawa team looks better than they did last year. I feel comfortable saying that after, I guess they've only played 2 games now. But, I feel like they're making progress, and that's good because, we know how long this team has struggled for and how much they need to have a bit of a turnaround here.
Yeah, I'll just be curious. And I mean, obviously we're early in the season. What does Bob Dice do here in terms of longevity? And he hadn't really, came in midseason, 2 years ago, right? And then had a really kind of crappy last year, Mazzoli and all that. So we'll see. I just don't know, like, how many years do you get a mulligan of some, okay, it was, the sun was too bright or it was too windy. Like, I mean, I just, like, how many times are we making excuses here? Like we always talk in the attendance, the gas station open down the road. Like, how many different things does he get before, you got to be judged with the product on the field? But yeah, I thought they were decent. Exciting game here. Let's get into this one. Unless you have any other thoughts on the Thursday one.
I think I'm good.
So this was interesting. BC at Winnipeg. Mariners had a horrendous loss. I was listening to driving and then tracking this game on Friday coming in. We saw this last season, BC coming into Winnipeg, embarrassing them, right? It was like 45 to whatever the heck it was. And because I remember it was during this game, I think it was Hodge was tweeting out about, the team's finally given up. I'm like, I saw Winnipeg fans give up on their team last year. They were leaving, the third, fourth quarter last season with all this stuff. But they're like hard to please here, Winnipeg fans. I mean, we were talking about Birmingham Stallion fans kind of riding with their team. Winnipeg, like, they really only like success here. But BC coming in, this was a nail biter. I really thought Winnipeg was going to take care of it. I've been on the record. I don't know. BC always has the killer instinct, but when they needed it, they got the field goal. What was it? Standback, right? Got the final yards they needed to kind of get it in and be able to put the game to bed. Thoughts on BC early in the season?
Yeah, well, I unfortunately didn't get to watch this game, but I know from history and obviously the time that I've been watching the league, BC and Winnipeg have had a lot of good games and a lot of games, particularly where the stakes were pretty high in terms of, the Western Conference and all that. But this was a great win for BC, and unfortunately for Winnipeg, I know how you were saying it's hard to please their fans, but it's also hard to go from 4 Grey Cups in however many years to an 0-3 start, and as history shows, a lot of the teams who start 0-3, the odds of making playoffs are not very high, and of course a lot of things can change, a lot of games left to be played, but that's just how the math has worked for multiple years. But just focusing on BC here for a minute, great win by them against a team who I think still has a lot of potential, even with that 0-3 start. A win that they needed, because they had dropped the game to Toronto, and maybe some people didn't expect that. And then the Calgary game, I know you had been talking about it, where like they played really well and it was a good win, and you were at home with the 50,000 fans or whatever. But it was a close game. You felt like maybe that they still could have done a bit more, just given the circumstances. So even though this win, it was close, you had to, it was one of those where you had to kind of wait it out, right? And it was, chunk by chunk. It wasn't, it wasn't anything, it wasn't like a shootout like some of them have been. I mean, we'll get to the Toronto and Edmonton game, obviously, but, it was good. And, like, Vernon is still playing great. He's still playing at a high level. Don't think there's any concern about him. Had nearly 400 yards passing in this game. He's coming up, Vernon now, to me, is one of the more experienced and more veteran quarterbacks in the league. I know we've got guys like Trevor Harris who are, 38 years old, still out there doing their thing. But to me, Vernon, because ever since he's came over to BC, and again, you can't forget his time in Montreal before that, I feel like, he's got a lot of experience in this league now, and it's not something you can overlook. I view him as a true veteran, and he certainly plays like it. The other good thing for BC too, Will Standback, a bit more productive this game. From what I understand, he's had a bit of a slower start to the season, and he kind of came in, to bolster a BC run game that I recall struggling pretty immensely last year at times. So good to see him get going. Again, takes a couple games to really, I think, just find your flow again, and you're with a new team and it's a different environment, all that. And then you have, Alexander Hollins, who looks like he's going to be the next superstar. And I know that BC is a bit thin at receiver. You lost Dom Rhymes. Keon Hatcher is injured. But, man, like, Alex Hollins, he's really stepped up to the plate. And I noticed that last year, too. I think he was in a bit more of a complimentary role, but he still had his fair share of big games. And he, to me, was somebody who had the potential to develop very well in this league. And this was, I guess in a sense, like the breakout game where you're like, okay, this guy is here to stay, and he can be, a top option, number one in this league for many years to come. BC is, again, I mentioned, they were a bit thin at receiver coming in. Today they released Travis Fulgham, who played in this game, and he was only, 3 catches for 33 yards. Not a lot, but still for a team that doesn't have a ton of depth at receiver, you wonder who they're going to replace that with. Stanley Berryhill is a guy who maybe gets worked in more. Believe he played at Arizona and was slated to play in the XFL, actually, with the Orlando Guardians, if I'm not mistaken. I might have the wrong player, but that's just going off the top of my head here. The other guy, though, that I think will, be all right down the stretch is Justin McGinnis. And I think, he even last year did not get enough credit for some of the, bigger plays that he had. And I think he's a comfortable option to the point where, obviously when Keon Hatcher does come back, which is obviously still a bit down the line, I think, you'll be all right with this. I think, Hollins and McInnes and maybe Berryhill, keeps getting some work in. You bring somebody else in now that Travis Fulgham is gone. I think, until you get Keon Hatcher, who was great last year, back, they have a lot of depth. And that was something I praised about this team last year on offense. I know we didn't talk too much about defense there, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're looking here, and I agree with you. Great to see Stanback get back in here. Really, and especially you look at how Toronto kind of managed the game against Edmonton with that dual kind of run game, and we'll get into that. Like, I think utilizing that and having the return guys come in and do that. Interesting. BC has always sucked at running and trying to get Stanback in here, was their big offseason signing to kind of bolster that. Good, like you said, good to see him kind of get up to that. I agree. Hollins, Alexander Hollins, I was watching today and my Dustin Nielsen impression. But he had a tremendous game, 2 TDs, the big chunk play near the end to kind of get in where they could get the first down near the end zone to kind of end the game that way. McGinnis, like you said, secondary receiver last year. Great to see him. Because, like you look on here, when you have Andrew Pearson, friend of the show, O-lineman, like when you have Andrew, he took, we had a fat man in the reception there where he was running down. When you have him in the mix, like that speaks to me, like, yeah, maybe we're, it really feels like we're developing the depth of this receiver core at this point when we have offensive linemen circling in. But yeah, I think Keon is a big miss at this point. We need to get him back. But yeah, basically at this point, it feels like, yeah, you have 2 secondary receivers really trying to step up. Hollins had a big miss last week, and then he came back. We were watching at the game in St. Louis. He had the big miss where it hit him, fell out, would have been a touchdown. He redeemed himself last week, and good to see him still getting plenty here, with 215, 2 touchdowns. I mean, he just had a tremendous game. On that side, on the Winnipeg side here, Oliveira is still trying to do Oliveira things. I think he's was coming back from injury, kind of missed some practice. I don't feel like he's totally up to speed. And then Claros just looks really not comfortable. I don't know. I mean, we've been using Vernon a lot and seeing him use his legs and run around, but Claros just really has seemed not comfortable all year kind of playing. And I can't remember his season stats at this point, but really down on the year. I mean, not super, high on touchdown. I want to see if I can get the stats up on here, but it really has had kind of a down start to the season thus far. Yeah. 0 touchdowns here in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, and part of that is because, again, we were talking about BC's receiving core, how it's kind of a mix. I think they'll be all right, but it certainly wouldn't help to have a guy like Keon Hatcher back. I think they really miss a guy like Kenny Lawler, his ability. You saw it last year. I mean, he just, I know he's got, I think it's a fractured hand or something. So I don't know what his timeline is. And last year he didn't come in late because I think he had an issue with his passport or visa or getting up there, to do something. So he hasn't played a ton or maybe as much as you would have hoped, but in every game that he's played in, he's been fantastic. And I think that's a guy they really miss. Another guy, too, that I don't think ever got enough credit was Rasheed Bailey, who was like maybe the second or third option, and he went over to Toronto. I think they miss him, too, and now the depth there isn't getting any better. I think Dalton Schoen, I know he played in this game, but I believe he's injured again and is going to miss some time. Carrick Wheatfall, who was one of their new guys who looked like he was going to step up to the plate and start doing some things. He's now injured as well, and I don't know the timeline on him, but it's tough. The one guy that I was going to mention, it's funny, on your, I guess it was the the preseason show, before everything started, the one guy I wanted to talk about, but we ran out of time, was Ontario Wilson from Florida State. That's a guy that I really like. He had 3 catches for 27 yards in this game. That's a guy that I really hope can step up too, especially with all the injuries. Maybe he gets some more looks. And again, I think he's a very dynamic player. I'm glad they have him. He hasn't done as much as I would have hoped up to this point. But again, they had a lot of guys, and now they don't. If you're not going to have Dalton Schoen, you're not going to have Kenny Lawler. It's tough for a guy like Zach Collaros, and he used to have a ton of options. I felt like, for all those years that, Winnipeg was at the top going to these Grey Cups, that, maybe the 3rd or 4th receiver, was almost an all-star caliber player in some cases. Now you have a lot of rookies who are still learning the Canadian game. They got to get up to speed. It's a challenge. So, and like you said, too, typically you'd fall back on the run game, like Brady Oliveira, who was phenomenal last year, best back in the league still to a lot of people. He was coming off an injury, so still a bit slow. Johnny Augustine getting some work in, and I believe he started last week because I don't think Oliveira played in that game. Looked okay from what I remember. But again, you're dealing with a lot of injuries, and the depth isn't the same. So now you have a lot of younger guys that are being propelled early into starting roles. And typically that's, just as history has it, even if it's a good opportunity for those guys, not always going to translate to wins. And I really think that's what we're seeing with Winnipeg.
Yeah. Last thing I hear, it was funny. We're seeing Strevler ride a lot in kind of the short yardage. And I think Pat was tweeted in the group like, "Oh, great to see Strevler." I'm like, not if you're a BC fan. Like, I'm not happy to see him getting all these touches. Mike here, a big UFL guy. Oh no, here's the one. Saskatchewan, BC, or Calgary. Who do I root for? I like all these teams. Well, Saskatchewan is Canada's team. That's what they say. Winnipeg, that they're kind of the big behemoth that's really been running the league here for the last 5 years. Seeing a little bit of a setback, and BC is America's CFL team. So if you like America, you got to vote for America's CFL team. But I'm good. I'm still cautiously optimistic about BC. I mean, I had my heart broken last year. I get very invested in all this stuff, but BC is doing enough. Defense, I think, still needs to kind of figure some things out. We talked with Ryan Phillips about all that last week, and where the defense has fallen, where he looked like he was going to be a head coach candidate here, and then now, we're seeing a little bit of setbacks on that. Anything else? We've talked Winnipeg to death here. Anything else on BC before we get out on this one?
I don't think so.
All right, so this was exciting, way more exciting than this had any right to be, in my opinion. My wife was out of town. I was off. I had a wedding, or had a conference Friday. I had a wedding on Sunday, so I was able to watch this game. I thought, well, God, I hope this game doesn't suck. Like, I'm going to sit down and watch this whole thing. And holy crap, this was the game of the weekend, I think, by far, a game of the season. I tweeted out. It seems like a lot of people were excited about this. Argonauts with a walk-off field goal to end the game. Shootout the whole way through. McLeod, dealing here, 4 touchdowns. This was a tremendous game. Toronto coming off the bye, they're 2-0 after their victory over BC in the opener. 2 TDs for Cameron Dukes. He looks great. We're kind of waiting for Chad Kelly to come back. Toronto staying really pretty competitive here.
Yeah, this was a really fun game, and I watched part of this one up until halftime. This was actually, I was doing some work, at the office there in Vegas before our game, and I had this on, and I was kind of multitasking because, wanted to see Cameron Dukes, what he was doing, and, it ended up being a great game, even in just the half that I watched. It was just, each team was trading touchdowns, a true shootout, right? I think that's what the definition is of a shootout, what the definition is of a shootout in football is, 2 teams exchanging touchdowns, and that's really it. There's not a lot of defense.
Not a lot of defense, yeah.
Which for some people, maybe isn't great, but for a lot of people, who like the entertaining and points being scored, they like that. I thought this game was great, though. But I'll talk about Edmonton first. This was unfortunate for Edmonton because I feel like, this was their game where they got up to speed, and that they probably played their best game of the season. A pretty complete performance. But I think because their defense is so young, I just said, maybe this wasn't the best game if you enjoy defense. I think you saw that a lot here, and I think that's the reason why they weren't able to pull this one out in the end, even though they did keep it very close. And, the offense was fantastic. I mean, look at McLeod, 28 of 38 passing, 342 yards, 4 touchdowns. I mean, that's a damn near perfect game, but when your defense is young, and I think there's some things they got to figure out there. It's tough, right? And they always say, defense wins championships, and that's where you want kind of the core to be, even if it's not the most exciting element. I think that's where you'd want it, but they don't have that right now. And again, they're going through that kind of transitional phase where they got to make some changes to get better. And we knew coming into the season that their defense was relatively young. And I know even before this game, they were shifting some things around, even up to, the starters, not just the depth pieces, but there were some guys in there that I think were, playing for the first time and, just trying to get some experience in. So ultimately it's tough. Edmonton's 0-3, and I think this might be like the third year in a row that they started 0-3, which is just really unfortunate. But McLeod Bethel-Thompson was the big offseason acquisition. So far, I think he's, lived up to what he's meant to be. Just a veteran guy that can come in, what to expect. There's no gap in his knowledge, or I guess that's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
But it hasn't translated to wins yet. So hopefully, they can turn that around. And they're going to have to keep, I think, on defense particularly, they're going to have to keep, making some changes and figuring out what's going to be the best unit, to move forward with. But then on the Toronto side, I said before the season, I said, Toronto's going to be a team to look out for this year. And I think a lot of people were overlooking them because there was so much maybe negative kind of stigma around the Chad Kelly situation. I think that kind of casted a blanket over everything else they were doing in the offseason. But I paid attention to the little things. And so far, a lot of those have, I guess, paid off, or I was right about them, because Toronto looks great. Toronto, in my opinion, their defense, I think, is young as well, and they lost a lot of pieces. I know Mike's talked about that. They could certainly use some help there, too. And, I mean, they gave up 36 points themselves. So, again, both defenses here might need to make some changes or figure out some adjustments. But ultimately, Toronto to me looks like a very complete team, as I expected them to be. Everybody said, well, we don't know what Cameron Dukes is going to do. And, there's just too many holes, right? That was the kind of thing, was there's too many holes. We're not going to be able to replace that. Therefore, we're not going to win games. But I think a lot of the young guys have stepped up really well. Again, in particular, Cameron Dukes, the former, Vegas Nighthawk, he's played great football this year. And I mean, in this game, he was very efficient, not flashy, I would say, but got the job done, high completion percentage, didn't turn the ball over, just all around a complete performance. One of the most surprising players for me in the league this year has been Kadeem Carey. Yeah. I know he was in Calgary last year, and people were saying, well, he's getting a bit old, especially for a running back. And, you're starting to see some wear on those tires, but he's come out hot this year. I mean, he looks really good. That looks like, again, people were saying, oh, well, they're not going to have AJ Ouellette, so there's going to be no one in the run game. Not only do you have Kadeem Carey, but you have Deontay McMahon, who I scouted when he was in college at McNeese State. And, he had a very good game this game, too, besides throwing a pick, which I missed that. I assume that was probably on some trick play, but had a nice touchdown run. Glad to see that they're working him in. He's a smaller, shifty back, catch the football. Again, ultimately just I won't go too much in depth on all the other players just for time's sake. But the point being is that I feel like this team has a lot more than people think they do. And so far it's showed. Now, I believe next week they're playing Montreal. That should be a great game. Obviously going to be a bit of an uphill battle for them when Montreal had just put up 47 points, and we've seen how complete their team is. But it'll be a good test, and I think this team is ready for it with the way that they've played.
Yeah, the McMahon, you brought up that because I was like, oh yeah, what the heck happened there? And it was so like off script, where I felt like Toronto had this great balance of like running and getting passing, going down the field. And then, yeah, they ran this trick play, and even I think it was Dunnigan was on the call, and they're like, what are they like? Why would you divert from kind of what you were doing? And if you look here at the team stats, if you look at Yeah, the rushing yards here, 186 to 35 here between Toronto and Edmonton. Like, and it's weird that we talked about this on here, and the run game in the CFL is so different because it's not like as prominent as the NFL with the 3 downs, and you really got to be in the lead back to kind of be in that position. But you saw Toronto do that all day, and it just felt like they ran over Edmonton. They couldn't stop them. I know Mike was talking, like you said, Toronto's young secondary kind of getting beat there over the top, to be expected. But yeah, like the Cameron Dukes thing is really like, it's like that meme where the primary quarterback's out and they're like, man, this backup quarterback's great. He's like, oh, he's not that great. Like, he's just fine. Like, it feels like Cameron Dukes is kind of playing himself into a starting role here with the Edmonton thing. It feels like, and I agree, McLeod's doing well, played a good game. I'm always wondering, like, what does this team look like if you're able to invest in other pieces and you have Trey Ford there and you're able to spend that money? Because like the broadcast is very much on the, like, McLeod is, willing this team here, and he's the game changer, and he's playing well, and he is. But I just wonder if you're not spending $500,000 on him when you have a backup quarterback that is, capable of doing, similar things, not reading the field and getting it out as quickly as McLeod. And I know they've talked, that's why they like McLeod, and he can make, be decisive and kind of do that. But if you have $500,000 you're able to spend on other stuff, I would be curious, what this team would look like. But it feels like the CFL announcers are like, no, McLeod, this is the right decision, and we're okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's still going to get brought up. And, look, I think it's the offensive performance here by Edmonton reminded me a lot of, in some ways, BC last year, because Vernon would frequently throw for, 300, if not almost 400 yards per game. And then you look at the rushing statistics where, that's obviously going to help boost your offense. And in some case, win you games if you can keep the right pace. And you saw Toronto do that with the nice balance between throwing the football and running the football. But Edmonton hasn't had that, and unfortunately Kevin Brown, who was a sensation last year, has slowed down a lot this year. And I don't know exactly why that is. But, Trey Ford's sitting there on the bench, and, sometimes when I've been watching Edmonton games this year, I understand, McLeod has played well. And again, it's what we expected from him. But, I still don't think it would hurt just to put Trey in for a couple, and again, it wouldn't be like the short yardage plays because they've got Prukop for that, but kind of like what Chris Streveler did with the Bombers, and I guess it was 2018 or 2019 when he was last there, where they would bring him in at quarterback and he would just run the football, but it's not short yardage. It's like a designed run play just for him, and then you put McLeod back in. Like, I don't think that would hurt, but so far they haven't done that, and maybe, I don't know, maybe that's a change you can make down the line. But yeah, I mean, so far there hasn't been much of a run game at all really from Edmonton this year, from my understanding, at least in the games that I've watched. And I think that'll continue to hurt them down the line if they don't do something there.
Well, no, and we talked last week because, you had Kevin Brown is not James Wilder, right? Where you have that come down anyway of that. But then, yeah, like when Trey Ford played last year, having to account for him kind of freed up Kevin Brown. And that was kind of what we had talked through last week. And yeah, now you don't, like, McLeod's not doing that. He's not running downfield that way. I mean, he can. I mean, he's got legs. He can do whatever, but it's not the same threat on there. So I don't know. I mean, Andy's incredulous. We're all incredulous about this Chris Jones and, Trey Ford thing and all of that. But yeah, when you look over there on the sidelines, and it was early in the game and you see McLeod, Trey Ford, and Dakota Prukop, you're like, Jesus, this team should be able to be better. Like, you have probably the best three, I would say, quarterback, room in the CFL right now, especially with BC getting rid of Dakota. I don't know why they did that, because now they're going to rely on Vernon to do short yardage. I think that is, I mean, bookmark that for week 14 or whatever. Vernon snaps his ankle or twists something trying to do that. But yeah, you look at this and you think like Edmonton should be able to, but like you said, can't get any run going. Toronto just really, like I said, played a complete game. Dinwiddie was on it the whole time, and Mike says not to doubt him. I just really impressed. And I mean, Toronto, like if you had said Chad Kelly's out for half the season, like, oh my God. I mean, Cameron Dukes is not the issue of this team at all. I mean, it's his defense giving up too many points, but they're still 2-0. I mean, Toronto looks great even with Cameron.
Yeah, well, I mean, and we knew Toronto's defense was going to be young too, but I still feel like they had a lot of pieces. Like Jake Seresna, for example, I think was a huge acquisition, and no one talked
Huge
about that.
acquisition. Yeah, big
And
acquisition.
still, he's still doing his thing. And I know I mentioned him and Sean Oakman would be a good pair, and I know they released Sean Oakman, but still, Jake Seresna had a sack in this game against his former team. I thought there was some interesting storylines in this game. A lot of former guys from each team, playing against each other, like McLeod, in Toronto, and Curly Gittins, and like I said, Jake Seresna, a couple others. Just felt like there was a lot of not necessarily revenge in this game, but maybe that's the reason why it was kind of a shootout, right? It was, prove it type of thing. And I know in those situations, you take it more personally. So I thought that added a nice element to it in terms of the storyline.
Yeah, it was cool. They were showing like all the hugs and then like, hey, well, until the game starts, and then it's all. So yeah, it was good. I was fun with that. Anyway, a good outing here. We'll see. We'll move on here. This one, I thought Hamilton looked decent last week, even though they lost. And I said, man, like they're still a really intriguing team here, and Bo looks better, even if whatever. There was, I think it was Rod Smith on the call, and there was the. Well, only McLeod knows, or excuse me, only Bo knows what he saw on that throw where he threw the interception, because it's threw it right directly into cover. It's I just like that. Well, I can't justify this. And well, Bo must have saw something that I didn't see. Bo did not have a good game. We're back to this. We're trying to throw for 45 attempts here. No run game to speak of when Bo is your leading rusher. That cannot be good. I don't know what James Butler was doing in this game. Really pitiful performance here from Hamilton. I thought for the, unlike last week, but this was really bad.
Yeah, it was tough. This was one of the games where you felt like early on that Saskatchewan was in control and they weren't going to let go. Like you said, I feel like Hamilton has a lot of good pieces. There's some things to work with there. Obviously, James Butler being one of the biggest names there, didn't have the best game. I guess it was yesterday because we're recording this on Monday.
Yeah,
but
Sunday,
yeah, he didn't have, the best game, and that's okay. You can't rely on one player to do everything. I'll get to Hamilton in a minute, but I really want to talk about Saskatchewan. Now, I understand it was a bit of a different game for Saskatchewan because Trevor Harris had to leave, and there was everybody I think everybody's heart stopped for a minute, and they thought, oh, is this, are we going to be having this again where it's a couple weeks into the season and Trevor looks really good, but an injury happens and now we have to figure things out, and the slide begins. We saw it last year, and obviously it's a different regime now, different story, a lot of different players, but I can understand some of the fear there, I think. So Shea Patterson comes in, former USFL guy. We're familiar with him, had been in the CFL prior with, BC and Montreal, which a lot of people I feel like kind of forget about because he was just a short yardage guy, but clearly he, performed well in camp this year, beat out Mason Fine for the backup job, who, had been there for several years. Shea comes in and takes that from him. Didn't look overwhelming in this game. I thought, again, it's kind of, growing pains type thing. This is your first game where you're really throwing the football in a while. You kind of got to figure things out. Again, the Canadian game being different than, when you played with the Michigan Panthers or when you were at Ole Miss or whatever. So, there's some things there, right? And I hope, Trevor is okay. Something tells me that, it was a precautionary move because
I was reading today. They said that he wanted to go back in, and they felt like they better play it safe.
Well, they were in control of the game, and I saw him warming up. I only watched the first half of that game and a bit of the second half when he didn't come back out, but he looked all right to come back in. I just assumed at that point they didn't want to risk it, which is, again, after what happened to him last year, and I completely understand that. I think Saskatchewan, they have probably been. I know Winnipeg being 0-3, or I said Winnipeg being 0-3 was the biggest surprise this year, but Saskatchewan being 3-0 might be the close second.
With the rookie with the new head coach. New regime.
Yeah, but I've been telling people, I felt very strongly about the Corey Mace hire, and again, everybody that I know has spoke very highly of him, and I think it's the idea of being a player's coach, and I've told people this personally, but when you're playing for your players and you're a younger guy, like he's only, 37. I bring this up every time, but like Trevor Harris, who's his starting quarterback, I think is a year older than him. So,
older than me.
Right. Yeah. And older than you too. We bring that up, but well, I'll spare you. But I think it's just it's a culture thing. It's a mentality thing, right? Like Corey Mace is a younger guy, and I think these younger coaches, even if some people might not view them as experienced, I feel like they can relate to a lot of the players better. And when you're bringing in a lot of new guys under a new regime, it's important to kind of establish the culture early and get people going. And we need to be kind of focused on, the same goal and task at hand here. I watch every video of Corey Mace talking in the locker room because I love the way that he presents himself. And again, I think that's where a lot of the credit goes is, to what he's done. He had his team prepared and ready. And he said, I heard the doubters. I understand this team's been in a rough spot for a couple of years with the way that they've finished out seasons. I want to make sure that we change that. And I do, everybody here, right, upper management and everything. So it's been really good to see, him succeed in that role. And, again, if I'm a Roughriders fan, maybe you don't let out the sigh of the relief until later in the season when you're still winning. Because, again, that's where they've had a lot of the struggles. When Craig Dickinson was there for a couple of years, like last year, they went on that slide at the end of the year. And, again, it's tough. And that was a bit different because they lost Trevor Harris and then it was Jake Dolegala. They had a lot of things going on. But this team looks really good. Another guy I want to talk about, too, real quick before we go back to Hamilton, Ajo, the rookie receiver who had the 40-yard touchdown catch in this game. Phenomenal story. And I got to bring this up because, I put out a tweet about it, but it really is beating the odds. This guy came out of Garden City Community College, straight from community college into the pro level, which you don't see that often. Now, he was a ranked recruit, went to Clemson, went to South Florida, but, had some falling outs there, couldn't play, injuries, all that. Went to community college, but typically, when guys go to community college to rehab, get reps, whatever, then they go back to NCAA, and do something else. But, Ajo took a chance and he said, you know what, I'm going to go pro and hopefully somebody sees, the potential in me. And I don't think he tested very well either. So he didn't necessarily do himself any favors, as the process was developing. But Saskatchewan took a chance on him. They took him, I think, in the 7th round of the CFL draft. And, he made it as one of the guys coming out of camp. Again, proved himself, kind of like I was talking about Shea Patterson, a guy that maybe people didn't expect to be there, but he's there. And now he's, starting to make some plays. And it's good to see because I feel like a lot of players, in any league, can be maybe discouraged or, some guys, I think, a lot of guys I know personally are working pretty hard and pushing and they don't care about the outside noise. And that's the way that it should be. But, for a guy to go from community college, straight to the professional level, even if it's not NFL, that speaks a lot to, his work ethic. And I know Anthony mentioned it, but he interviewed him at the Combine, and he said that, he was a really nice guy and, saw potential in him too. So it just speaks a lot to, about owning, I think, your journey, to a league, whatever league it is, in this case, the CFL. But, I hope more players can, kind of lean into that and be like, okay, well, it doesn't matter as much, about where I come from as it does, what I do in the moment when I'm given the opportunity. And that's what I tell a lot of players that I recruit and work with all the time. Similar story with Cameron Dukes in Toronto, not to get, too off track, but like that guy, they always talk about it on the CFL broadcast, Lindsey Wilson College. No one knows where that is. It's a tiny school, 2,000 kids or whatever. And I think it's Kentucky. No one knows where that is, but this guy still, made a career, coming from there. NAIA school, went to the IFL first, obviously, like I've talked about a bunch of times. I won't plug that anymore. But, again, it's just about, finding your own path and journey. And I think there's a lot of guys in the CFL who are doing that. More so now. I'm not going to say than before because I've only followed this league for a couple of years and I'm young, but always just positive to see guys kind of figure that out and, craft their own journey, like I said.
We got a comment here. Garage Gym Life. We'll get to you in a second here before we round out this, asking about where to watch games. I will say it's interesting on here, and you talk about Saskatchewan, and I appreciate your story. And of course, that's why we bring Evan on, to be able to kind of share insights like that, which is great in terms of players, backgrounds and stories. But like, it was so weird that the Saskatchewan, like all year, and like we'd have on Saskatchewan media and Jamie Nye and everybody else, and Daryl Davis. And then at the end of the year, it was like everyone hated Dickinson and they wanted him to get out and they weren't playing for him. And you're like, okay, like I don't, where was that all year? Like, I didn't hear that. Like, I talk Saskatchewan all the time. And now, you have Corey Mason there. And I remember listening to Rod Peterson's show, and they're like, well, the team might stink, but at least you're going to play for Corey. Well, the team's playing for Corey, they don't necessarily stink. So you get the best of both worlds. But it really is weird, like you talked about him, that, just the mentality he brings in and the players playing for him. It's just cool to see. I mean, it's Saskatchewan making a whole turnaround here that I don't think a lot of people suspected. I will say this Trevor Harris thing is an issue, was an issue last year. And I would be very careful with that, because like we saw, Shea Patterson here, 4 of 10 coming in and airmailing balls might not be your backup option if anything happens to Trevor.
Sure. I mean, but just staying on the player topic here for a minute. Another guy, I know I haven't talked enough defense on the show, but I'll talk about it now that I have a chance. And again, because Saskatchewan's such a complete team, there's a lot of great examples of players who are excelling here. CJ Avery, their linebacker. This was a guy, played for the Vegas Vipers in the XFL. He's been phenomenal this year. And it's interesting because from what I recall, again, this is all going off the top of my head because I didn't have notes for this, but I think Montreal signed him, let him go. Saskatchewan got him after that, and then now he's really developing fast into what looks to be, one of the better linebackers in the league. He's made a play in every game this year. I just can't, say enough good things about, how well he's looked, and just strikes me as a guy that can really develop into a leader and someone who, again, can play in this league for a long time, right, if we're talking about player development and all that. But I'll put Saskatchewan aside for now because I want to talk about Hamilton before we get out. Hamilton, I don't think the expectation was too high for him this year. Again, they have a new head coach too, Scott Milanovic, who was with the organization last year and helped turn around a lot of their offense, whether it was Bo Levi Mitchell in, even though, he was banged up and it was kind of hard for him to find consistency, or Taylor Powell, who's still there and I think, may end up eventually kind of, taking control of things. It's interesting with Bo Levi because, he was so good for so many years, and then Jake Mayer took his job in Calgary, and, Jake Mayer so far this season has looked good. Now I wonder, with some of these games, and it's nothing against Bo Levi. I think it's just, age and time and situation, a lot of things that play into it. But you wonder, like, Taylor Powell, who they extended not too long ago, by the way, so they want him there. You wonder if that, you wonder how long the leash is on a guy like that. And I know, again, this wasn't the expectation for Hamilton this year was not to win a Grey Cup, at least from the opposing side of things. Obviously, if you're within the organization, your goal is to win a championship. And if you don't want to do that, then you shouldn't be there, period. I know that from working in sports, but just from the outside perspective, the odds, were not in favor of them going very far this year. And, you just wonder, and again, teams in those situations, sometimes they like to pivot younger, and you just wonder, how long. I know Bo Levi, like in the offseason, we kind of wondered, like, things didn't look great after the playoff game that they lost. And I think Scott Milanovic, maybe helped turn his opinion around, but just because he turned his opinion around, doesn't mean that, that it's going to be his job forever. Right. And that's just how football works. I keep saying that, it's part of the business, but it really is, so that's just something I wanted to point out. If we're going back to just talking about players, the last guy I'll really, focus in on here, Shamar Bridges. This guy, really cool story. Again, he came from a D2 school, Fort Valley State. Great frame. I think he's 6'4", 6'5", just shy of 210 pounds. So that's what stood out from him, coming out of D2. Obviously, that's not a level where a ton of guys are going into the NFL. But he had an opportunity with the Baltimore Ravens coming out. And it was interesting because he only played, I think, 4 games his senior year or final year, which was in 2021 at Fort Valley. And I think he had like 28 catches in 4 games, ultra productive, great frame. A guy like that, even from that level, is going to get a shot. And was with the Ravens, hung around there for a bit. And then now he's starting to do some things here in the CFL. And I think this might be kind of the silver lining, story in Hamilton, one of those feel good, like, hey, maybe we're not winning, but we're at least giving, a young guy like this an opportunity, because I see a very bright future for him too. So just wanted to point that out. Obviously they've got a lot of guys, and, I'll maybe go, if I'm ever, doing this again, I'll do a deeper dive, but we're running out of time here. So I'll leave it at that.
Well, that's good. Yeah, though, Coach Craig agrees with you. He says Bridges balling here. He was seen as a tweener wide receiver tight end by the NFL. Great to see him killing it. We'll put this one to bed here. We're gonna go watch. We got the Stanley Cup here. We don't want to compete with that. And there's like a lot of sports night, Evan. I know you don't care about hockey, but I'm gonna go see the Bike Riders movie with my brother. That Tom Hardy motorcycle game.
I'll say this much. I know you criticize me for not being the big hockey guy, but that game tonight, that's a must watch, at least for me, in terms of sports, between, Oilers and Panthers. I mean, you're talking about, for sports that have, 7-game playoff series. I mean, boy, if Edmonton pulls this one out, which I don't know, again, I really don't know, but if they pull that one out, I mean, that's history, and you want to be able to see that. So.
Well, and it just is like the Kraken have not played meaningful hockey in months, and so it's amazing to think that we're not done with the playoffs here at this point. I mean, the hockey season starts in October. This is anyway. Last thing here, Jim wants to know, Garage Gym Life, watching the games. It's weird this year because last year it felt like a lot of the summer games were on CBS Sports Network, and then as they transitioned to CFL Plus, as they moved into the fall, it's kind of hit or miss. I knew the game was on Saturday. I pulled up the CFL Plus on my phone. And then it turned into it wasn't available in the United States. And so then we had to do on the CBS Sports Network. So it's you kind of got to pick your poison on that. So I would just go on CFL Plus, check and see. It'll say if it's available in your area or not. You just put it in your email and all that stuff. Otherwise, if you have YouTube TV, Fubo, any of that kind of stuff, it's available on there at the CBS Sports Network. But yeah, it's kind of weird. There's not really the Thursday, Friday games or these games, it's kind of confusing. I don't think it's a great solution. A lot of Canadians tried to convince me that it was the best thing for American people watching, unless you live here and have to deal with it. Anyway, but should be a good slate next week. We won't talk too much about this. I'll just throw it on here while we get out of here. Edmonton at BC should be exciting. I'm going to have on Mike Hogan. We're going to talk some Argos, and I'm trying to get Steve Milton on to talk Hamilton as well. But should be a good show. I got Ben Fisher on as well. We're talking UFL and how did they do, kind of recap for the season. Evan, anything else from you before we get out of here?
Yeah, I was just going to say about the TV schedule and figuring out, where, if it's on CFL Plus or CBS Sportsnet. If you look up CFL TV schedule on Google, and I did this last year too, there's actually a PDF document that you can find online that has the listing of all the games through the season and, what network they're going to be on, whether it's, obviously TSN if you're in Canada, but for the Americans, it'll denote, whether it's CBS Sportsnet or CFL Plus, because the games that are on CBS Sportsnet with the contract, they won't be available on CFL Plus. It's not simultaneous. It'll be international audiences only if the game is on CBS Sportsnet in the US. So yes, it's complicated. I'm sure. I don't even know if that made any sense to somebody who hasn't really watched it, but that's the way it is now.
Yeah, like I said, I liked the ESPN because at least if you had the TV contract, if you had the right, whatever, everything was on ESPN. Now you did have to have the whatever tier of the YouTube TV or whatever to get that, but I at least like that. We're now. It doesn't matter what you pay or what you do. Some of the games are only available on your phone. So anyway, that's a tale for another story. Whatever. We'll get Jason back next week. Like I said, like and subscribe. Should be a good episode. Friday, we'll figure out next week as well. Could be some changes on here, but I appreciate Evan hopping on here last minute. I know Evan wasn't prepped for today, so really appreciate that. Evan, anything else?
No, I think that's it, but I think we did a good job.
Awesome. We'll see you guys next time, and thanks.